welcome to the Team Church podcast with Kevin Gerald. My name is Jody Cameron, and I'm really excited to be here with you today. This is the podcast where we start really important conversations with the hopes and the belief that you can take this conversation and continue it with your teams. And so today I'm here with my dad. Actually, you know him as Pastor Kevin.
You are the new host today.
I am. I'm so excited. We've been preparing for this, and we've been talking about it, and I'm excited. We're talking about my inheritance today, right? Like that's
No, we're not. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about my grandson's college tuition either.
Okay, another time. No, but today we're talking about that leadership rises and falls on these three things. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to talk about these three things and give sort of a broad stroke today. And maybe we'll come back to them at another time and dig a little deeper. But let's just talk about what are those three things? What are the three things that leadership rises and falls on? I think we call them leadership distinctives. So let's just give the three, put them on the table and get going today.
Okay, sure. I'm excited about this, by the way. I feel like if somebody thinks that the theme or the title is maybe over exaggerated, I don't think they'll feel that way. I don't think you'll feel that way in a few minutes. I think you'll realize there really is something to these three distinctives. First one is character. Just simply leadership rises and falls on character. The second one is core competency. And the third one is culture. Those three things. And of course, there's lots of depth that goes down into all of those, but those are kind of like the big top three that leadership rises and falls on.
So character, strong character, core competencies, and culture. Let's talk about the first one. Let's talk about character. In the world that we live in today, the definition of terms is so important. So let's define what we mean when we say character or strong character.
So what we mean is that it's not just doing right things, it's doing right things right. So it's about when you have character and you build character, you're not just doing the right thing, but you're doing it with the right attitude. You're doing it with the right motive. You're doing it with the right considerations. In other words, you're considering who's going to be impacted by this and how it's going to affect other people. So you're considering others in the process. So that's what we mean when we began to talk about the issue of character.
Like you can do what your lead pastor is asking you to do. So it's the right thing. Yep. But if you're not doing it with the right attitude, or you're not doing it with the right considerations or the right motives, like I'm just doing this because I was told to do it, but I don't really agree with it, right? Like those are the things that is like a chink in the armor of character. And so let's talk about this. If character is one of those elusive things in our society today, we have these conversations. Is character something that people either have or don't have? Like, is it just you either have character or you don't? Yeah. Or is it something that you can have it and lose it? I mean, what do you think about that?
I think that's always a great question to ask ourselves. And in the world, I think people would say, well, you either have it or you don't, you know. But I think when it comes to us as believers, that we began with the fact that our basic character is flawed from the beginning. And we have to begin right there. We have to begin with the idea that we have all sinned. We have all come short of the glory of God. So, when we came out of the womb, we did not come out with perfect character, right? Or really any character. Everything starts there with the sinful nature. So character's flawed, but the good news is that character can be weakened or character can be strengthened. And a lot of that has to do with how much a person has a desire actually to do what's right and do it the right way.
So when we talk about character And, people don't necessarily start with character. If you've ever had a baby, they do not come out being perfect all of the time, right? It's that sinful nature.
They're not considering others.
They're not always considering others.
Mommy.
But if we're a person that wants to develop character and we get to a point where we feel like, we've made some good decisions. We know what good morality is. We want to, have a pure mind or live a pure life or that sort of thing. With all of the struggles, we'll just call them, in our world today with leadership, especially in the church world, it feels like sometimes leaders are just dropping like flies in the character department, which is, I think, why we're talking about leadership rises and falls on these three things, character being one of them. As leaders are sort of dropping like flies, what is going on?
Right.
I feel like it's a character drift.
Yeah.
We were talking about this,
I love that.
It's almost like when we went to the ocean years ago and, I was a junior hire and I was, playing in the ocean right in front of you guys, and you guys were hanging out on the sand. And I just was like doing my own thing, playing in the water. And then all of a sudden I look up and I am 50 to 100 yards away from you in the ocean, still on the shoreline, but a good distance away. Mm-hmm. The drift happened. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's what happens with our character. Yep. We can strengthen it and it gets stronger, or this drift happens where I honestly don't believe that people wake up, from like going one night, going to bed, loving their spouse, and waking up the next morning plotting how to have an affair.
Right.
I just don't believe that happens.
Right.
It's the TV shows that they start to watch. It's the conversations they start to entertain. It's the text messages they start to engage with. And then all of a sudden you're on this pathway. It's the drift that happens in character. So can we talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we try to get into this conversation, not just here, but with your teams and with your friends and with pastors who will talk to pastors. I think we've got to go there. And so, like you said, you and I were talking about this, and you brought up that term, like character drift, and I love that. One way that this happens on church teams or church staffs is when there begins to be a behavior, a lifestyle. You'll begin to do things with that group. You'll begin to watch TV shows that, gals may say, oh, on Tuesday night, we're watching this show and get together. And maybe the show is not something you would want to advertise or let other people know you're watching it. And it starts in innocence, like you said. It starts with just, everybody, we're gonna have a good time. Yeah. It's harmless. Conversations that basically would not be done in front of other team members or other staff or other church members outside that group. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's where a lot of the danger begins. Mm-hmm. It begins in this idea that, well, it's just with my group. It's just with us. And there's certain behaviors that we wouldn't want others to know that we're doing. So actually what we do, we protect ourselves from the conversation of whether it really is healthy or not by keeping it secret.
Sure.
And so I feel like that's something that right now we need to talk a little bit more about than we have at least in my previous years of ministry, is this idea of secret, keeping secrets that maybe are not really big secrets, but it has to do with lifestyle. It has to do with what we'll talk about, the language that we'll use with people. I think alcohol right now is a big thing that some people are good to do it in private, and even to drink more than they should be drinking in private, and would not they wouldn't want other people to know. They wouldn't be as loose. They wouldn't be as free. They wouldn't go as far, right?
Sure.
Conversation, alcohol, the shows they watch, whatever it might be, you can go further within the context of a certain private group. And to me, I'm just saying that's dangerous.
Sure, it's the drift.
It's a drift.
It might start harmless, but if we're not careful, and what I've heard you talk about is that finding that gravity, that true north.
Yep.
And it seems like it works in tandem. The closer we get to true north, the easier it is to make decisions to stay there.
Yep.
But the further we get away from it, in the secret times or on that pathway, the harder it is to get back. The easier it is to stay drifting.
Right.
So maybe just talk a little bit about that true north.
Let's use the same example. When you start to, we would just say, kid yourself. You start to talk to yourself in ways like, so what true north is, but you start to say, yeah, but we're just friends. Like we're just, it's no big deal. It's harmless. So you're starting right there to move away from an absoluteness.
Sure.
None of us want to be legalistic. We know we're New Testament Christians, but even in stuff that, like I just said the word alcohol a while ago, I just put it out there, and I don't know in our listeners who drinks, who doesn't, what, but the bottom line is the Bible does talk about drunkenness. So that's my point, is that can we get absolute about one thing? Like by yourself or with anyone else, drunkenness is dangerous.
Sure.
And we need to abstain from that. Stay away. We need to say that. We need to just say we don't get drunk. We don't get drunk with our private group. We don't get drunk with anybody. We don't drink that much. And if we start to go there, we're not going to condemn, but we're going to be honest. We're going to talk. We're going to have a conversation. We're going to say, hey, my friend, hey, that's not good. That ain't cool. We start interacting. Why? Because it's not just about the alcohol. It's about our character.
Sure.
It's a character issue at that point, whether we're going to be really honest about a true north. Does that make sense?
I think so. I feel like we also need to go to the other side, because as a 1 on the Enneagram, I tend to be a perfectionist.
Yep.
And so my maybe fatal flaw would be not trying to do something in fear of not being perfect. And so a character flaw for me would be maybe not taking a risk. So maybe it's not, I'm going to go get drunk later. That's not my particular flaw, but I think we all have flaws in our basic human nature, like you talked about, that we need to be aware of. And so on the other side of it, like being able to take a risk and not be so afraid to fail, I guess. And what I've been trying to teach myself while I'm teaching my boys as a new homeschool mom is, you don't have to be perfect. I'm not asking you to get 100% on every single assignment, on every single test.
Good.
We're teaching Cody to read. I don't expect you to know every single sound, every single word. You're learning. You don't have to be perfect, but you do need to try.
Yeah.
You do need to make the effort. I do need to see you trying to sound something out. And in our character in leadership, I think also being able to say, we know you're not going to be perfect.
Right.
You're going to mess up. You're going to have those moments of adrift. And what we're saying is, let's be quicker to come back to the true north. Let's be quicker to say, okay, I'm not perfect. And instead of falling off the wagon in any of the flaws that we might have, being able to sound the alarm, have the conversation with somebody, be accountable, and say, I'm coming back to the table, true north. I'm coming back. I'm not going to drift 100 yards. I drifted 30. I caught myself. I'm going to come back to true north and get back on track.
So character doesn't mean that you're perfect. It doesn't mean that you're faultless, but it does mean that you're honest with yourself and others.
Right.
In other words, you are factual. Character can't be based on feelings.
Right.
That's why we use true north. Character has to be based on the fact, the truth, not our truth, God's truth.
Right.
Right? The truth. That's why I used that word drunkenness a while ago. Like, boom, there's a Bible boundary.
Yep.
There it is. Now let's be really honest and quick to say, boop, that's getting too far. Let's rein it in. Another thing that character is, you're not faultless, you're not perfect, but you honor people whether they're present or not.
Right.
So a character flaw would be to talk about people behind their back. To say things loosely, sarcastically, make fun of other team members. You just got to be careful.
Sure.
And we have to be willing to say to one another, hey, I'm uncomfortable with that, We have to keep bringing that correction to character. Character would say, have fortitude. Like build your strength and your fortitude. That's character.
Yeah.
Which simply means I'm not walking away from something I'm responsible for. I might start a transition responsibly away from something that I don't think I'm supposed to, or I don't feel God wants me to continue in. That's totally different than walking away from something you're responsible for. So I'm just trying to create some sense, and this goes way deeper than we have time for today. But that's what we're talking about when we talk about character. Is we're talking about we're not talking about being perfect or being faultless. We're talking about knowing truth, having a true north, and saying, this is how I live my life.
Yeah, and doing the right things right more often.
Right.
Just that's the goal. Do the right things right.
Yep.
More often. Okay. Let's go to the next one. We have 3 things that leadership rises and falls on. We've talked about strong character.
Yep.
Another one we wanted to talk about today is core competencies. So what is core competencies to you? And maybe let's talk about some examples.
So Ecclesiastes 10:10 says that if the axe is dull and its edge is unsharpened, more strength is needed. But skill will bring success. I love that verse. Mm-hmm. I've loved it for years because we all have a tendency sometimes with a dull axe to just swing harder.
Right. I'm going to make this work.
From a force, and we start being forceful. So it could be like even when it comes to leading a giving spirit in your church. Mm-hmm. Like if you're just swinging hard, like that's probably going to create more problems than it is creating a groundswell of generosity. But if you sharpen the axe, meaning your skill level of how to communicate about giving, how to communicate about volunteering, it could be the same thing. If you just bulldozer.
I need you. I'm desperate. We need somebody here. Go do this. You don't like it. It doesn't matter. Like I need a body. That's swinging hard with a dull axe. But if you reframe it and you create that skill of recruiting and going to people with the right verbiage, it changes the game. You're still not going to get 100%. But you're going to get a lot more people because your skill is
skill. That's what we're talking about with core competency. So in basketball, this well, it would include ball handling. It would include free throw shooting.
Yeah. Rebounding, defense, the footwork. Yeah.
And in baseball, it would be pitch, hit, throw, run maybe, but those things, coaches just work, stay on the fundamentals. And in education, it is reading and writing and arithmetic. Like stay with some fundamentals throughout all of your education and get better at it, get sharper at it. So in leadership, core competence also exists. And let me just say this. If you're in a position of leadership and you're not getting people following you like, you would hope, the team's not growing like you would hope, hear me, listen up right now, because you might take it personal. You might assume people don't like you, or you might assume, well, nobody wants to be involved. Nobody wants to be on the welcoming team or the connection team. And it may not be that at all. It may be as simple as a lack of leadership skill on your part. The good news is anyone who wants to improve their leadership competence absolutely can. So that's what we mean when we talk about, when we say everything rises and falls on three things.
Yep.
Like the first one, absolutely character. The second one is core competencies.
Yeah.
Continuing to develop those things that will make you a better, stronger leader. Fundamentals.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. What I hear you saying is core competencies are the fundamental skills
yep.
that leadership teams need to have on their team. And so when it comes to what does a core competence look like on a leadership team, let's talk about some of those examples.
Communication would be one.
Right.
I'm always, after all these years, amazed at how quickly my ability to communicate can deteriorate in a moment. And, you know, how many of us have been in a moment where we're like, phew, I didn't say it right. I didn't quite get it right. I didn't get it like I wanted to. Well, if you're really wanting to sharpen the axe of communication, you'll do that the rest of your life as a leader. Mm-hmm. You'll walk away and you go, okay, here's what I wish I would have done, said, come out of my mouth, framed it differently. I come off the platform, and sometimes, you know, on a weekend, I'm like, yeah, way to go, Kevin. Mm-hmm. But there's still times where I'm like, you know what? I wish I would have approached it this way. I just wish I would have framed. I feel like I would have been saying better what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, but I think that's also communication is a skill, and I think also what you're saying is part of self-awareness too. Which is, I think, another core competence that we've talked about, and being able to be self-aware, knowing that when I'm self-aware, it's not to put myself in a box. Right. Like I mentioned, I'm an Enneagram 1. I tend to be a perfectionist. That's not to give me, free reign to just say, well, I'm a 1, so I can't do such and such. Like it's self-awareness doesn't put us in a box. Our personality doesn't put us in a box. Yep. It allows us to become self-aware of our strengths, our weaknesses, the things that we can work on, the way that we can frame how we communicate to ourselves or to others, how we can grow. But self-awareness is one of those core competencies that helps get people further faster as a leader.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it's basically I've heard psychologists talk about when a person doesn't feel good about themselves, they actually start avoiding mirrors. And I thought about that with leadership, is that when you don't feel good about your leadership, it becomes you subconsciously even maybe avoid the mirror that would show you how you really look.
Sure.
With the goal of actually getting better. But the more insecure you are, the more you'll avoid any form of mirror, whether that's a friend talking to you, whether that's watching yourself on a video,
right?
Whatever it might be, you start avoiding the very thing that actually could help you get better and develop, through greater self-awareness. So self-awareness is definitely a competency that the higher you go, the more aware we are of ourselves, the better we can, get skilled at being a leader.
Other ones that we've talked about, influence, collaboration, problem solving. I mean, anybody can be a problem seeker. We need problem solvers, right?
Exactly.
And having the drive, that initiative, discipline. Do you want to hit on any of those today?
No, maybe we'll talk about those in another one.
Okay.
Let's just let's move along. We got 3.
I know we've got one more, so let's just kind of bring this to a closing point here. But our last element, I guess, that we want to talk about, leadership distinctive, of what leadership rises and falls on. We've talked about strong character. We've talked a little bit about core competencies. The third one is culture. What we've been talking about is this leadership distinctive of being a culture carrier and really owning how to create culture by design. So let's talk about that for a few minutes.
Yeah, it's so important. And the reason I put it right up there is I just believe culture trumps everything. Like at the end of the day, when it comes to our churches, our teams, our staff, creating the right culture. And years ago, I wrote a book. People may not even know about it, but it's a book about church culture by design or by default. And today, as I look back over the years of ministry, I think that has been, for us, it's been that game changer in so many situations that our church just, and our staff, when we automatically are flowing in our culture, and when we're automatically in this space where this is the way we do things around here,
right,
kind of thing, it just, it puts everybody at liberty. It puts everybody in freedom. We know what we are, and therefore we know what we're not. And there's a clarity around what we do around here and the way we do it. And so culture coming in, culture going out. And the better you are as a leader at actually embracing that culture into your own self and being that automatically, it will go with you as a culture carrier.
Right.
So, for example, if you're a children's pastor or leader, the team culture you feel in the staff atmosphere that maybe is set by your pastor, or the staff meeting set by your pastor, or the main auditorium set by your pastor, whatever the design is of the culture of your church, those are the kind of things you want to carry. And you want to carry it over to the children's area, to the team. You don't want a whole different culture
right,
in the youth department or the children's department than you have in the main auditorium or the main setting with the team. Culture carrying means you have it and it goes with you and you transmit it and you expand or extend the culture, the DNA of the house.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, though, because a lot of times team members could take for granted that the culture that's in the main auditorium will just naturally trickle into their department. So whether it's into the connections team or into the kids team or the youth team, and it's so important to say, no, I have to be a culture carrier.
Right.
I need to take the culture of our church and actually infuse it. I need to teach it and I need to live it.
Right.
I heard it before that culture isn't taught, it's lived. So we can say what culture is and teach it, but at the end of the day, our actions is what is going to make that culture live or die.
Yep.
And so we have to live that culture into our teams and into our locations or into our departments and bring that culture to life in all of the different rooms of our church and all the different teams of our church by being a culture carrier.
I just tell you, as a church leader, going into other churches and speaking and communicating, it's like night and day when I go into a healthy culture versus going into an unhealthy culture. Like in a healthy culture, I speak better, I communicate effectively, I enjoy myself. In an unhealthy culture, I'm like, what am I doing here? This is no fun. And so what I try to do is I try to help people realize that you're creating a healthy culture so the same thing can happen when people come into your team.
Right.
If good people come in that have a good culture in their life and they walk into a culture of negativity, they walk into a culture that's not affirming. They walk into a culture where the team's not pulling together and unified. They get in there and are like, whoa, they don't want to be in that.
Sure.
They don't want to be on that team. And they may never tell you, but what they're feeling, what they're sensing is culture.
Yep.
So that's why culture is way up at the top and leadership rises and falls on the culture we create.
Yeah, I mean, the culture will happen by design or by default.
By default.
It will.
Yep.
There is going to be a culture.
Yep.
And it's not just the culture that you say or that you want.
Yep.
It's going to be the culture that is lived and acted out. And so it's going to happen by design or by default. By default. And if we want it to be a life-giving, positive culture, that is gospel oriented and Bible based and welcoming and unified, we can't just say it. We also have to carry it,
create it
where we go.
Amen.
Man, well, I hope that this conversation has been helpful and we've just gotten it started. There's so many more things to say, but we hope that you'll take this to your team and talk about what are some core competencies that are alive in your team and in yourself. What are some character things that you can do and get better at? What are some of the culture by design that's working, and what are some of the culture by defaults that need to be addressed? Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of some right now at my location. I'm like, okay, I know I gotta highlight these and make some changes, and so we don't have to be perfect, but we need to try. We need to get back on track and find that true north. So any last thoughts, any great things you want to share?
Yeah, I just hope I see all of you at Team Church Conference coming in August, first week of August. If you haven't registered yet, I hope you do. And the whole team, bring the whole team and be a part of this August Team Church Conference.